It's a colossal death trap. A prehistoric watering hole that's the scene of an ultimate fight on a battlefield like no other. Multiple species, predators and prey, engaged in a mass fight to the death. Science helps to piece together the carnage, step by step. It's every dinosaur for itself in the bloodiest battle of the Jurassic era. They're the Earth's first fighters, the ultimate predators. New discoveries in forensic science bring to life the prehistoric art of war. This is Jurassic Fight Club. The bloodiest battle of the prehistoric era. It happened about 150 million years ago, when the Earth was much different than it is now. In what will become North America, a shallow sea has begun to split the continent. Increasing oxygen levels allow dinosaurs to grow taller than a 6-story building. It's the late Jurassic period. Sauropods, long-necked, four-legged dinosaurs, and the largest land animals grow to giant proportions to reach vegetation that is 60 feet tall. In what is now Utah, temperatures soar in the 90s. During their peak, droughts take their toll on planet Earth, including those at a receding lake bed. This lake in particular will be the scene of a prehistoric bloodbath, unlike any other. Fast forward 150 million years. 30 miles south of Price, Utah, a local herder is tending to his sheep. Suddenly, he sees something protruding from the soil. A decade would pass before paleontologists would launch an investigation. Today, the site is called the Cleveland Lloyd Quarry, and what was found here would rock the scientific world. Investigators uncovered one set of remains, then another, then another. Soon, they had uncovered something stunning, thousands of bones matching up to multiple species.
The Cleveland Lloyd Quarry is absolutely one of the most remarkable fossil sites in the world. Over 15,000 individual bones have come out of this quarry. Paleontologists think that that's not even half the amount of bones that are still buried in the ground. It's an amazing sight, but one of the first things you have to ask is, why are so many bones from so many different kinds of dinosaurs assembled in that one location?
Thousands of bones lay scattered across an area no more than a mile across. Then, another revelation. Among all of the bones found at the site, almost every herbivore bone recovered showed signs of being crushed, broken, and bitten. Deep gashes were in some bones. Others had been somehow pulverized. How did all of these dinosaurs die at this one site? In order to unravel the mystery, paleontologists first employed a scientific approach called taphonomy.
Taphonomy is basically looking at what happened to a fossil from the time of death of an animal until it actually is buried and fossilized. And taphonomy is basically a technique for understanding what led to the death and burial of the animal or the plant itself. So we can get a tremendous amount of information just by being careful in how we excavate our sites, because that gives us clues about what happens leading up to the death of that animal.
Taphonomy evidence revealed that the site was once a freshwater lake bed, but why was it filled with so many bones?
During times of extreme drought, the water levels in a lake can shrink pretty rapidly. As they shrink, what happens is the upper layer of mud sort of becomes dry when underneath it remains pretty wet and sticky. So as animals walk out across this to get to the water and get a drink, they get stuck. Their weight causes them to crack through the upper crust, and that's when they get stuck, and you're not going to get out.
It was the first vital clue. This prehistoric death trap was once a lake bed. multiple species would come to drink here. Then, another breakthrough. Investigators identified one of the dinosaurs. It was one of the most distinctive of the Jurassic period. Stegosaurus.
There's nothing in the world today that looks like a Stegosaurus. And it just was so peculiar with that long cone-shaped head and this big curved back and these short front legs and long back legs, those plates on the back and the spikes on the tail. It was just so different from anything known, past or present, that it's sort of an icon of the Jurassic.
Its name means roof lizard, for the 17 plates arranged in a double row along its back. These plates ranged in height from 4 inches to almost 3 feet and gave Stegosaurus its unique appearance. Their exact function is still a mystery.
Some people think they look sexy. Perhaps female stegosaurs really like the look of the plates on the male stegosaurs. Some people think that perhaps it played a role in thermal regulation, that is, heating up or cooling down the animal. And of course, to some degree, they would have played a defensive role in the sense that they would have been very hard to bite should you try to bite that part of the stegosaur. Personally, I favor the sexiness hypothesis. It's kind of more fun to say.
The Stegosaurus found at the site stood 14 feet tall, measured about 28 feet in length, and weighed 3 tons. Their front legs were shorter than their rear, making them a slow-moving dinosaur, but far from helpless.
Stegosaurs are very much like their armored cousins, the ankylosaurs, in having very small forelegs and very long hind legs. This allows them to move the front quarters around, pivoted around a small point, and use the long legs to move the back end very fast around that same point to keep the tail pointed toward what they're attacking. And what a tail they had. They had 4 spines sticking out the very end of the tail. In fact, the last 2 spines stuck past the point of the tail.
The Jurassic era was filled with predators. At the watering hole, Stegosaurus would have utilized 2 weapons for protection. The first was its tail spikes, 4 cone-shaped hell raisers, pointing 3 feet high.
Those are the greatest dinosaur weapons ever found. These spikes are incredible weapons. By swinging that tail, if he strikes you with them, you're done for. Those spikes could penetrate bone, they could penetrate flesh, and they could cause an injury that would end the attacker's life.
Be like a big spiked mace, and I don't mean the stuff you spray, you know, on muggers, but rather a more medieval weapon, a big club with pointy parts on it. I think it's really quite what it would have been like to have been hit by the end of the stegosaur tail.
Experts continued to dig. Then, the investigation took an unexpected turn. Scientists uncovered a second set of remains near the adult Stegosaurus. It was a second Stegosaurus, but this one was a baby. More than one Stegosaurus had been killed at this lake bed. James Madsen Jr. is one of the original scientists involved in excavating the site.
So there were probably 3 or 4 stegosaurs in there. One that stands out at the small end of the spectrum. It's a smaller animal, and it looks like it's injured. It has a wound of some kind or another.
Not one, but 2 Stegosaurus, an adult and a baby, had somehow died in this death trap. Shallow bite marks found on the hip bones and ribs suggested that the baby had been attacked by a mid-sized predator. But the wounds would pale in comparison to what the investigators were about to find. Scientists continued to investigate. Then, a second species was identified. This one was 100 yards away from the 2 Stegosaurus. They belonged to a titan of the Jurassic world, a long-necked dinosaur named Camarasaurus.
Camarasaurus was the first dinosaur that showed that there were giant animals, bigger than elephants, with these long necks, heads full of plant-eating teeth, enormous sturdy legs, and gigantic tails, and that these things once roamed the earth in great numbers.
They were the most common long-necked dinosaurs of the late Jurassic period. They could grow to a staggering 20 feet tall at the hips, measured 60 feet in length, and tipped the scales at 20 tons. That's 9 times the mass of an elephant. attacking a dinosaur this size would be like attacking a building. Camarasaurus got that big because few dinosaurs were as successful in its environment.
Camarasaurus was very successful because it could feed from a variety of ranges. It could feed low at the ground, it could feed at about its shoulder height, and it may have been able to rear its head up on this long neck to feed high up in the trees. By having this big wide range, it could find food in all sorts of environments.
Camarasaurus also owed its success to a set of 5-inch long spoon-shaped teeth that paleontologists realized could defoliate entire trees at will.
The teeth of Camarasaurus actually interlock. They kind of tongue and groove almost one into each other. They would almost function like a serrated beak or a single large cutting surface. So they're probably stripping vegetation quite effectively.
The remains of 3 Camarasauruses found together in Wyoming in 1997 suggested that these dinosaurs traveled in small herds. But as the lakebed investigation continued, the mystery deepened. Scientists realized something intriguing. Very few Camarasaurus bones were found. Why? The answer would be a vital clue.
Really big animals like Camarasaurus would have been pretty reluctant to walk out to the lake bed. Their sheer mass and weight makes getting stuck a real possibility. So unless it's an incredible drought and that was the only place to get water, they're probably going to keep their distance. That's why I think that so few remains of Camarasaurus were found at the Cleveland Lloyd site.
As plant eaters, they were not natural aggressors. When they encountered a predator, Camarasaurus most likely relied on their sheer mass to act as a deterrent to a fight.
Any animal that weighs 15 to 20 tons is just going to be an absolute powerhouse to deal with. Just stepping on potential predators would probably do them in. If you'd want to be very careful around them. A large African elephant often weighs in the 5 to 6 ton range. These animals get up to 3-4 times that size easily. So we're already talking much stronger than an elephant. In some ways, perhaps modern earth-moving machinery is a better analogy for the type of power they have.
If that's not enough of a deterrent and you're still coming in, then Camarasaurus faces you. He's gonna wait till you get too close, and then he's gonna rear up on those hind legs and crush you. If that doesn't work and you outflank him, then Camarasaurus uses its tail, which is a defensive weapon. He'll swing that tail from side to side. If he makes a direct hit, the fight is all but over. He's sending that predator up into the stands. It's a home run, game over.
Its size, muscles, and weaponry made Camarasaurus immune from most attackers. But the deep wounds and gouge marks found in the bones at the watering hole proved that no one was safe. And as investigators were about to discover, there was a third monster at this site. And this one wasn't a plant eater. It was a true killing machine. Near the town of Price, Utah, paleontologists uncover one of the richest bone beds ever found in North America. This was the site of a prehistoric watering hole, a death trap during extreme drought. But the discovery of thousands of pulverized and injured bones suggested something much more sinister. There were killers patrolling its shores. Paleontologists must work to identify who may have been responsible for the carnage found at this site. To find the answer, they used the same techniques as modern crime scene investigators.
When we look at a dinosaur site, of course, this is representing something that died 65, 75, 100 million years ago. And a lot of times your clues are cold, but really we reconstruct it the same way a forensic scientist would go in and reconstruct mystery surrounding a murder case.
The investigation continued. Then, a third species emerged from the Jurassic lake bed. And this one was a predator. It was one of the rarest killers, Ceratosaurus. Its name means horned lizard, not for the hornlets above its eyes, but rather for the blade-like appendage on its nose. It's the only predatory dinosaur known to have this distinctive feature.
Those horns, they're not for attack, they're for display. And if you're gonna have a display structure, that means at least on occasion, you get together and you show off to each other, say, look at me, I've got the biggest horn. So at least some of the time, these guys got together in groups.
The Ceratosaurus stood 13 feet tall, measured 20 feet in length, and weighed 3,000 pounds. That made it a mid-sized predator in the late Jurassic. Ceratosaurus may not have been large, but its oversized teeth meant that they worked much like a meat slicer.
He's got the most wicked-looking teeth of any predator that ever walked the earth. He's got two different kinds of teeth. His upper teeth are immensely long and very blade-like, while his bottom teeth are a little stubbier and a little more powerful. What that tells me is when he grabs you, he uses the muscle in his jaws to push those lower stubby teeth into you. They're the anchor. Now he brings down the meat slicer and cuts a chunk of you out.
With a bite like that, Ceratosaurus could compensate for two glaring weaknesses. He wasn't especially fast, and his claws weren't large or strong compared to other predators.
Ceratosaurus's best hope would to be get in there, take a big chunk of meat out, and get back. It would not have been good for clamping onto something, for hanging in there in close combat. Just get in there, strike, and get away as soon as possible.
Its skeletal design is sort of weak, so it's not really built for a full combat. It's really better designed to sort of slash, grab, rip, and then run away.
The forensic evidence painted an intriguing picture of how the melee started. Driven by thirst, a stegosaurus and its baby have moved out onto the lake bed to drink. Their compact feet slip easily through the hardened upper crust, and they become mired in mud. They are now an easy target. Attracted by the sounds of the struggling pair, a single Ceratosaurus arrives on the scene. Its long toes and splayed foot design allow it to move across the upper crust without breaking through. Its target, the juvenile.
The juvenile is basically helpless. It normally relies on its mother to be able to protect it, but she's stuck up to her shoulders in mud, so she can't use her main weapon, which is her spiked tail. Like its mother, the little juvenile has spikes, but he can't move them because he's literally exhausted from trying to get out of the mud.
The Ceratosaurus moves in for the kill. He bites the juvenile in one of its most vulnerable areas, behind the rib cage, directly in front of her hind legs. The mother looks on helplessly as the Ceratosaurus tears open a large gash in the juvenile's flank. We now know that by the late Jurassic, Ceratosaurus was fast becoming extinct, desperate for easy prey. The discovery of a Ceratosaurus skeleton made it clear that it hunted the lake bed for food. But there was a piece of the puzzle that experts couldn't answer. Of the tens of thousands of fossil remains, only a single Ceratosaurus was found. This mid-sized predator did not have the power or the weaponry to cause the extreme damage to the tens of thousands of bones. So, what had happened? The answer? Another killer, even bigger, was keeping them away. The theory, as it turned out, would gain momentum with the discovery of a fourth set of remains. And this one was a much larger, more lethal predator, Allosaurus.
Allosaurus was the most common dinosaur found in the Cleveland-Lloyd site. It's a massive animal, so it was more than capable of crushing bones and ripping apart the skeleton.
Allosaurus was the first giant predatory dinosaur to stalk North America. It predates T-Rex by some 80 million years and was the biggest carnivore of its time.
When when the first big skeletons of Allosaurus were uncovered, people finally saw that there were meat-eating dinosaurs that were as big as a killer whale, with powerful claws on its hand, truly fearsome meat-eaters, a terror from the Jurassic period.
Of the thousands of bones excavated at the prehistoric lake, 2/3 of them are from Allosaurus. It stood about 16 feet tall, measured 38 feet in length, and weighed up to 4 tons. In addition to its size, Allosaurus possessed 2 lethal weapons that made it a top predator. The first was its trio of 6-inch claws extending from each hand.
The claws of Allosaurus would have been like an eagle on steroids. They're long, they're curved, they're actually very similar to eagle claws in shape, but backed by huge muscles.
Allosaurus's second lethal weapon was its combination of powerful jaw muscles and serrated teeth, 2 to 4 inches long.
The teeth of Allosaurus were not like T-Rex. They weren't bone-crushing. They seem to be more blade-like. They're more slashing teeth. And that's probably more of what it was doing when it attacked things, was making a slash, not holding on, trying to bleed it. In some ways, that's the way sharks actually attack. They'll go up and they'll bite something and bleed it and allow that to weaken the animal.
But the dinosaur investigators then had to wonder, if the teeth of Allosaurus were not capable of crushing bone, then why did the dinosaurs found at the watering hole show signs of being crushed? The answer? 8,000 pounds of Allosaurus actually stomped on them.
This was the site of one of the most gruesome and barbaric acts ever recorded in the fossil record. The bodies were piled on top of each other, and the earth literally ran red with blood. In order to keep from sinking into the mud, I think the Allosauruses were actually standing on their victims while they ripped them apart. And that's why so many of the bones were crushed and broken.
But if Allosaurus was the apex predator, why then were so many Allosaurus bones found in the lake bed? Investigators believe that while feeding, many of them became stuck themselves. But one question remained. Why would so many Allosaurus gather in the same place at the same time?
Interesting that with Allosaurus, we find, in some cases, large accumulations of Allosaurus bone. And so when we see large accumulations, it makes us wonder what's going on. Did these animals live in large groups? We might even call them flocks, considering they're closely related to birds. Or were they together for some other reason? An interesting parallel that is compelling in many ways is what we see at the La Brea tar pits in California. Many of the fossils that we find there are of predatory animals, of wolves and predatory birds and things like that. The La Brea tar pits we regard as a baited trap. Animals get stuck in there and the predators are lured in.
Hundreds of Allosaurus skeletons, but only a single Ceratosaurus. There is no doubt which predator ruled this Jurassic lake bed. Based on this new information, what does the evidence say happened when Allosaurus came on the scene?
First, we look at whatever evidence we do have, and then we look at the behavior of modern animals and apply that to those prehistoric creatures. By doing this, it gives us a realistic version of things with science to help back it up.
A trapped baby Stegosaurus is being eaten alive by the Ceratosaurus. The smell of fresh blood drifts downwind, perfectly in the path of a team of approaching Allosaurus.
These Allosaurus hunted packs because it allows them to bring down much larger prey. They use their incredible sense of smell like a prehistoric homing device. Their keen sense of smell tells them that there's an adult and juvenile Stegosaurus about 100 yards ahead. But they also pick up the very distinct scent of a Ceratosaurus, and this is the hated enemy of Allosaurus.
One Allosaurus moves off to flank the unsuspecting Ceratosaurus. The remaining Allosaurus head towards the scene. The Ceratosaurus is outnumbered, and scientists now know it was also outsmarted.
It was sort of an earlier model meat eater. It doesn't have the more sophisticated brain that we see in some of its contemporaries like Allosaurus. So although it was pretty strong, it didn't have the claws, it didn't have the brains, and it also didn't have the size of some of the other giant meat eaters of its environment.
It's a face-off, one that's about to see a colossal monster join the fight. A single Ceratosaurus faces off against two Allosaurus. The prize? A helpless Stegosaurus and her young. From the top of the food chain, Allosaurus goes into killing mode.
If he's up against somebody bigger, Allosaurus is going to be cautious. He's going to stand back. He's going to really size up the prey, and he's going to focus on his adversary's weak points. If he's fighting somebody smaller, the battle changes. Now he's interested in rushing in and beating the crud out of his opponent. I don't care about weighing your strengths and weaknesses, brother. I'm bigger than you. I'll rip your head off.
There's a new clue. Scientists have found Allosaurus bones around the world. They all show signs of serious trauma. We know this dinosaur was hardwired to kill or be killed.
There's been a lot of Allosaurus specimens found that have wounds on them, damage from having their foot crushed by another dinosaur, or holes punctured in their tail from the spikes of a Stegosaurus. But these are healed wounds. These dinosaurs survived these attacks long enough for the bones to heal over. They lived in tough times, but they were tough and they could take it.
Having identified their adversary, the Allosaurus move down the hill towards their intended target.
Allosaurus are cooperative hunters, so as two of them move down to take on their adversary head-on, the third moves off in a different direction in an effort to outflank the Ceratosaurus. We see this sort of ambush maneuver in modern lions and sometimes wolves. If you can keep your opponent's attention focused in one direction, it allows for a surprise attack from the other.
One of them takes advantage of the Stegosaur's vulnerable position and uses him as a platform. The Ceratosaurus begins to move away from the Stegosaurus. With the force of a runaway freight train, the third Allosaurus crushes the unsuspecting Ceratosaurus. We now know that some Stegosaurs could have as many as 8 spikes on their tail.
The massive weight on the female Stegosaurus causes her body to lean forward. This frees her tail. The moment she feels her tails become free, she swings it with every bit of remaining energy she has, and it lands a direct hit.
The location of the bones tells the story. One Allosaurus is down. A few steps away, the body of the Ceratosaurus lays motionless. A Stegosaurus struggles to free herself from the jaws of this relentless, muddy tomb. Next to her, the lifeless body of her offspring. 100 yards away, another dinosaur comes to the lake bed.
A family of Camarasaurus moves down to the lake bed. Leading them is a huge male. Its sheer size is enough to deter almost any attacker. The Allosaurus are now faced with a difficult choice. Do they continue their attack on the Stegosaurus, or do they dare take on something as huge as a Camarasaurus?
I would say that under normal circumstances, a Camarasaurus was such a big animal that it didn't really have to worry about attack very often. We certainly know that sometimes they get stuck in the mud. And in a situation like that, if it's isolated from the rest of the herd, Allosaurus may have taken a chance.
Allosaurus was built to move at a good pace compared to other dinosaurs. Some experts estimate they could run as fast as 20 miles an hour, but the Camarasaurus could have been 150 years old. It wouldn't have moved as quickly.
We can look at the skeletal structure of Allosaurus and see it was a fairly capable moving animal. We can even go beyond that, though, and look inside the head to look at the inner ear. what we see in Allosaurus is the agility of a predator. When we look at the inner ear of Camarasaurus, what we see is an animal that moves very slowly in a very stately manner. This is an animal for whom quick movements were not particularly important for this animal. So Allosaurus was a relatively fast-moving, agile animal. Camarasaurus potentially could have just stood still and faced the music.
Allosaurus had a very bird-like stance. Having their legs designed like an ostrich is what gives these dinosaurs their ability to run so quickly. And like a cheetah, they use their long tail as a counterbalance to help them change directions when they're running at top speed. It's the combination of these features that allows Allosaurus to grow huge, yet move like a sprinter. Camarasaurus, on the other hand, is built like an elephant. But when you're that big, you aren't in much of a hurry to get to where you're going anyway.
In fact, a giant species of Allosaurus grew to an even greater size than its cousin, T-Rex.
When you look at Camarasaurus and you look at Allosaurus, the weapons of Allosaurus are a lot more obvious. Allosaurus has blade-like serrated teeth in its powerful jaws. It's got these eagle-like talons at the ends of these powerful arms. But don't discount Camarasaurus here. It has its size, and size is a great weapon. On top of that, it's got a very long, broad tail, which you could use to swat at an attacker.
CAT scans show that Allosaurus was able to strategize more than the enormous monster.
We can also look at the brain and see differences there too. When we look at the brain of Allosaurus, what we see is some enlargement of the forebrain, the cerebrum. On the other hand, in Camarasaurus, we see a very small brain, and in particular the cerebrum, that same center of higher functions, is really quite small. What that suggests is that in the heat of battle, the slightly larger brain size of what we see in Allosaurus would have potentially allowed it to, in a sense, adapt to the changing battle situation. With Camarasaurus, it's operating purely by instinct.
Experts now know that the Camarasaurus would have sent out a distress call, which Allosaurus would pick up and recognize immediately. With the CAT scan evidence and unprecedented insight into predatory dinosaur behavior, experts now know how the apex predator took on a monster dinosaur. A herd of Camarasaurus approaches a drying lake. Their skeletal design prohibits them from lowering their heads to the ground. With their keen sense of smell, they pick up the scent of an unusually high number of predators.
Their sheer size and mass is usually enough to deter any predator from attacking. But the large number of predators assembled in this one area puts the Camarasaurus on high alert.
Despite the threat, quenching their thirst is a priority. The alpha male steps onto the mud-encrusted shore. As he positions himself to get a drink, he finds it difficult to maneuver.
This puts the dinosaur in a very precarious position if it happens to get attacked. Unfortunately for this sauropod, it's unaware of the mud trap that lies just beneath the cracked and dry upper crust.
The enormous weight of this Jurassic titan cracks through the dried mud layer. Its elephant-like front feet become stuck. Each time it tries to pull its legs free, it ends up sinking even further. The stuck Camarasaurus begins to panic and bellows a distress call. The Allosaurus pick it up and run 100 yards away.
The Allosaurus make a very wise decision to abandon the Stegosaurus and go for the Camarasaurus. That Stegosaurus just freed her tail and killed her. Well, they know now she can defend herself, so the sounds of the Camarasaurus makes it much more interesting of a target. So they move move off and decide that's the thing they're going to attack, because if they can kill it, it'll keep them fed for 3 or 4 days.
At the sight of the Allosaurus, the Camarasaurus herd turns and retreats, leaving its leader to face the threat alone.
Camarasaurus are herding dinosaurs. Their #1 priority is to make sure that the babies make it into the next generation. When 2 Allosauruses showed up, their priority is to move away from the danger and take their babies. Unfortunately, that leaves their leader abandoned and stuck in the mud.
The Allosaurs approach carefully, circling to make sure that the Camarasaurus is firmly stuck in the mud. The anatomy of the Camarasaurus shows 2 weak spots, the flanks and the neck. A deep gouge or bite in those strategic areas, and the herbivore goes down.
Under normal conditions, there is no way these 2 Allosaurus would dare take on a bull Camarasaurus. But the fact that it's stuck in the mud has changed the whole battle plan. They'll attack him as long as they can reach one of his vulnerable areas.
Taking up positions on either side of the giant sauropod, the Allosaurs launch their attack, teeth and claws primed to bite and slash.
The Allosaurus leap onto the side of the sauropod. They're trying to cut through the thick flesh. If they can rip open its side, the lifeblood of that sauropod is going to spill out on the ground, and that's going to end the battle quickly with no harm to the Allosaurus.
The Camarasaurus strains from the weight of his attackers, but in a defensive move, shakes them off. But not before the Allosaurus, using their large hand claws, inflict deep wounds in his flanks. But under the intense heat of the Jurassic sun, scientists say, an unseen force begins to take its toll. Overheating.
The massive size of these Allosaurus makes overheating a real concern. Almost all evidence points to these dinosaurs as being warm-blooded creatures, which means they have no trouble warming up. But cooling down can be a real chore. And after their fight with that Ceratosaurus, their bodies were already in high gear. And now with this new assault on Camarasaurus, their temperature gauges are in the red.
Like some modern-day animals, the Allosaurs shut down momentarily.
Like modern birds and dogs, the Allosauruses pant in an effort to expel excess body heat. But they also have a special adaptation that allows the heat to escape through their skull. It's a large opening called the antorbital fenestra. It's located directly in front of the eye socket. Most people looking at the skull think that that's the actual eye. With only a thin layer of skin covering it, it's ideal for allowing excess heat to escape.
With their body temperatures back to normal, the Allosaurus are ready to fight. It's 2 predators versus Camarasaurus on an ancient lake bed, and all hell is about to break loose. During a drought in the late Jurassic, a receding lake has become a graveyard. 3 Allosaurus have killed a Ceratosaurus. A Stegosaurus, wielding his lethal tail spikes, has killed one of the unsuspecting Allosaurus. 100 yards away, the surviving Allosaurs focus their attention on a Camarasaurus stuck in the mud. Using their 2 key weapons, sharp teeth and vicious claws, they inflict serious wounds. If they can make the kill, the predators can feast for days. The Camarasaurus, despite being at a clear disadvantage, wages a strong self-defense. The Allosaurs stalk their prey, looking for a weak spot.
If one of the Allosauruses can get to the soft skin of the neck, they might be able to sever a major artery or cut off the air to the lungs. That will absolutely end this battle and bring down their behemoth prey.
The Allosaurus circle their prey. They use an anatomical adaptation to their advantage, splayed toes.
The Allosauruses don't get stuck in the mud like the Camarasaurs for two reasons. Number one, they don't weigh as much, but number two, they have a remarkable adaptation. It's the design of their foot. Like modern birds, their toes are splayed out in 3 different directions. This configuration gives them incredible traction when they're running at high speeds, but it also gives them stability. And the weight of the body is distributed between these 3 toes and not straight down, as in the foot of Camarasaurus. They work like snowshoes, keeping the body from breaking through the upper hard crust while allowing them unimpeded movement across the lake bed.
One of the Allosaurus attacks. The Camarasaurus is quick to respond.
Like a freight train, the impact crushes the ribs and splinters the arms of Allosaurus and drives its own humerus deep into its chest.
The momentum of the tail allows the Camarasaurus's front legs to become free. Using the power in its rear legs, it raises its body. The other Allosaurus darts in.
The Allosaurus can't stop. Its momentum literally drives it directly under the foot of the massive sauropod.
With its massive weight, the Camarasaurus crushes its last remaining rival. But its victory would be short-lived. With all of its energy spent and once again firmly stuck in the mud, the Camarasaurus is condemned to a slow, agonizing death.
The Allosaurus was so focused on the fact that Camarasaurus was stuck, it wasn't in top predator mode. That meant it got in too close. Never in its wildest imagination would it have thought that that Camarasaurus would shift its center of gravity, free those giant front feet, and crush that Allosaurus like it was a bug.
Camarasaurus may have triumphed over Allosaurus in this fight, but in the ultimate battle for survival, they and all the other dinosaurs at the lake would lose.
At the end of the Jurassic period, something big happens, and it causes the extinction of a lot of different dinosaurs. Allosaurus, Camarasaurus, Stegosaurus, Ceratosaurus are victims to this unknown killer. It appears that global climate change was the catalyst. When your environment changes, you've got one of 3 choices you can make. You can move to a place that suits you better, you can adapt to this new environment, or you die.
Today, experts still seek to know more about these monsters who dominated the planet 150 million years ago.
For years now, paleontologists have noticed that there seem to be different types of Allosaurus. The discussion now is, are we truly seeing different kinds of species that live alongside each other, the way perhaps wolves and coyotes do? Or are we seeing instead a single species that's changing across time as the environment changes and as the animals change? And that's a really interesting question if we want to understand how dinosaurs in general responded to the environment.
While the search for answers continues, this much is known. During the late Jurassic, at a dry watering hole in what is now Utah, a colossal battle took place. An unusually high number of predatory dinosaurs died alongside of their prey. Their bones are proof of a brutal world, where a simple drink of water could lead to the bloodiest battle.